Hey, folks, welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast today. Looking forward to a great show with Brian McLaughlin from Mountain Man Medical, our director of training there, and director of awesome stuff.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me on, Riley. I'm happy to be here.
We'll give folks a moment to check in and give us a shout out. Tell us where you're listening from today. Would love seeing where everybody's at. We'll kick off the official recorded portion of the show momentarily. It's gonna be a good episode. We're gonna talk about how one word can potentially save lives, and this is something that obviously Brian's very passionate about. I'm very passionate about as well. So we'll have a good time. Hey, Hopper, how you doing, buddy? Oh, yeah. So good point. We are kicking off about an hour early. I've got an appointment at the normal podcast time, so we're a little bit after that. So we had to bump up an hour. Hey, Bobby, thanks for joining. We're clearly catching everybody off guard, Brian.
Yeah. That early time frame.
And we definitely know which ones are not in the Mountain or Pacific time zone when they check in like Nicholas and say, "Afternoon, guys."
Yeah.
It is still technically morning here in Colorado. All right. So, again, today we're talking about one special word that can really make a difference, keep you focused in an emergency situation. So, what is that one word? Well, you have to stay tuned in to find out. So, I think we'll go ahead and get it started, and I'm sure we'll have a few more that join us. Oh, something just like flew into my eye. Weird. Random. There we go. That feels better. You ready, Brian?
I'm ready. Let's get it.
Let's do it. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 441. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network of shows. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and I'm joined today by our Director of Training at Mountain Man Medical, Brian McLaughlin. What's up, Brian?
What's going on, Riley?
We're looking forward to a great show with Brian today. We're going to talk about how one word could potentially save a life, maybe even your life or the life of a loved one. This is a key thing to get into your head, because what I have found is this can really help you be focused when things seem to be falling apart, which is often the case when we're dealing with emergency trauma medicine, which is the topic of today's episode. So, of course, Mountain Man Medical, our sponsor of today's episode. I'll go into a couple of special sponsor messages momentarily, but I had to get something off my chest, Brian.
Okay.
And you may not have heard it, but I was just catching up with the episode that Jacob recorded with Andrew Branca last episode. And I just got to say, somebody's got to light a fire under Jacob's butt when he's doing the intro to the podcast. You know, it's like, this is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 440. Welcome. I am your host.
Got to put a little pizzazz on
it. Jacob's not really the dude to put pizzazz on stuff, but we need to liven up the show just a little bit.
He needs a hype man. That's what he needs. I can get in the back and just pump him up a little bit.
But it's a great episode, by the way. So, folks, if you missed episode 440, it is not yet quite published by the time you hear this episode, if you're listening to the audio recording, it will be published, but the audio version of that episode will be published tomorrow morning. So if you need to catch that one on your podcast app, or of course you can go see it on YouTube or Facebook, but they address some really important legal issues. I thought it was a really great episode. So back to episode sponsors, mountainmanmedical.com. Two things. First off, we just launched this last week a new trauma kit. I'm holding it up here for the camera for those of you watching. This is the Wind River kit. Look at this thing. It's like the size of my head, okay? So it's quite a bit bigger than the Yellowstone and the Sweetwater kits that you might be familiar with. This thing is perfect for the vehicle or on the range or in your boat or any of that kind of stuff, outdoor activity. I'll tell you what, this is the one that's riding shotgun with me in the truck. And this is the one that's coming out on the table at the range when we're there teaching classes or shooting or whatever. Let me just go down real quick, and we'll have Brian chime in too with his thoughts on the Wind River. But let me just highlight for you what is all included in the Wind River trauma kit. 2 North American Rescue genuine CAT Gen 7 tourniquets, 1 SWAT-T tourniquet, 1 North American Rescue 4-inch mini emergency trauma dressing, a Israeli-style dressing, 4 pairs of gloves, shears, North American Rescue Hyphen Compact Twin Chest Seals, twin pack, a permanent marker, a emergency rescue blanket, 2 self-closure elastic bandages, 2 quick clot, 4 yards of 2-inch rolled gauze, 4 burn cream packets, 4 triple antibiotic packets, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, or acetaminophen, Tylenol, diphenhydramine, which is antiseptic wipes, adhesive bandages, 10 of those, a triangle bandage, 1 of those, and 2 non-toxic instant cold packs. Most of you probably just turned off your radio or your podcast app, just trying to listen to that all, but gives you the idea. We packed a lot into this one kit. It's meant to be kind of that, like I said, that for me, it's my perfect vehicle kit. It will go with me everywhere I go. I've got, an ankle kit I often wear. I've got a kit on my backpack that goes with me just about everywhere. I've got other kits in my vehicle. I've got a kit in my range bag. This is the big boy that'll go with me. So, Brian, obviously with your expertise, we put together the Wind River kit. What are your thoughts on this new kit?
Well, I put a lot of thought into it, trying to put up a kit that's going to be able to handle a much wider variety of situations. Our Sweetwater and our Yellowstone, they're great kits, but they're more for, your 1s or 2s type of patients. You're not going to be treating a large number of people for that. And
right. They're more like true IFAKs, like individual first aid kits.
Yeah.
And this is taking it a step above an IFAK.
Right. Ideally, you could have, a Yellowstone for each member of your family kind of a thing, and then everyone would be pretty well stocked up. But not everybody's got that kind of money. And some people want to be able to use their medical kits on a more regular basis. Trauma is important, and you should have gear to treat trauma, of course, because it is, you can die from it. But at the same time, you've got a lot of other things going on, like strains and sprains and headaches and nausea and stings and all that other type of stuff that tends to pop up, especially with, the kind of community that we tend to cater to. They're outdoors a lot. They're out doing stuff. These are, generally people that do things for themselves around their property, and you're using chainsaws or you're doing your little home remodel. It's important to have some trauma gear on standby in case you need to keep yourself alive or, a family member alive until the ambulance can get there. So the Wind River's designed to treat more people. There's a lot more trauma gear in it. The Israeli bandage, an extra tourniquet. You've got the SWAT-T. You can treat either one really, really bad patient or multiple trauma patients with life-threatening wounds.
Yeah. Yeah, and we stepped it up with this kit too, in that it also doubles as a more of a traditional first aid kit with all the other items, your Band-Aids, some of the meds, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, and so forth. It's kind of the do everything kit that's not so big that you need a backpack or a whole separate thing to haul it around with. So So it's a great kit, available again on the website, mountainmanmedical.com, available now. Go check it out. We definitely encourage that. One final thing we want to mention and remind you all of the free emergency trauma response training course. It's available for anybody to use. Covers some really great information, important information, basic life-saving information. Brian, of course, a big key, and you were the big contributor to making sure that course could come together. But that is always available, always free. Go to mountainmanmedical.com/trauma-medicine-training. That's a link to get you there and get signed up for the free emergency trauma response course. That also, if you complete that course, grants you access. You can join our Facebook group that's only for those that have been through that training course. And that's a great place to interact with other like-minded individuals. Brian's in there. I'm in there. If you have questions about anything trauma related, that's a great place to have those discussions. Again, you got to go through the free training course online at mountainmanmedical.com to get access to the Facebook group.
I got a couple of things to say about that. I'm really proud of the training program that we got out there, and I'm really excited that we're able to offer it for free. A big reason why I wanted to become involved with Mountain Man Medical was because I believed in the vision of trying to help as many people as possible. And it's fine to sell the medical kits and everything, but all of the gear in the world won't help you out if you don't have any training to back it up. And it's not ideal to train online. Personally, for me, I prefer to do that in-person training where I can get that real hands-on experience. And when I fail, I've got an instructor to tell me why and how I can do better. But at the same time, you got to have something. And with COVID out there, it's kind of hard to find those classes. So offering the ability to offer an online class for free, I think is a huge value, and I'm really excited for everybody to go check that out and tell me what you think. I think the class or the whole course turned out really well. I think you were a big part of that, making sure that came together like it did. And there's a lot of good training in there, and it's all for free.
Yep, absolutely. And someone's requesting that we post the link to that in the chat. For those of you listening to the audio podcast, you can grab that link in the show notes of today's episode, and for those of you watching, I will drop that link in here momentarily. So,
and if anybody wants to see Riley with blood all over him getting tourniquets put on, then you got to go check it out.
Right. And, we had a great time filming that course, and I am also, proud of the way it came together. I mean, I think it's a great training product, and I agree with you that in-person training, hands-on, is very, very important to get as well. This is either a great refresher for those of you that have been through some courses before, or it's a great primer before you are able to get to a in-person course. And I will encourage this in the link, by the way, the link that's in the show notes of today's episode. On that page is other training opportunities, such as Stop the Bleed courses. There's a link on that page to take you to find your nearest Stop the Bleed course, and that is a great course. Many of them are put on for free, so get signed up for a Stop the Bleed course, and that'll be a great help for you. I'll tell you, Brian, and I've shared this before, I don't ever get tired of talking about it. Maybe people get tired of listening about it, but I've had a couple of traumatic events in my life, including responding to a couple of pretty serious vehicle accidents where people have died, unfortunately. They're very, very, some of those memories are very vivid in my mind, as I'm sure you have some vivid memories yourself of being on, in the war zone, or even in some of the other things you've done. The thing that first became my big driver, that has developed this passion within me to get training, to get some knowledge, to be able to handle myself in a stressful situation, and to be able to be an assistance to those in need. Because, this is the sort of thing where we're there to help somebody on the worst day of their life, or we're helping ourselves. And it's our worst day of our life. We've got a bad injury and we're bleeding out, whatever it is. I responded to an accident I came up on the scene as a young 18-year-old, just out of high school, working a construction job, and coming home from work, and just being just behind a really bad accident where a little girl unfortunately passed away. I felt so helpless in that instant. Even as a Boy Scout, and I had some Boy Scout first aid training, I didn't know what to do. And it impacted me in a big way. The only thing I felt qualified to do that day was to offer words of support, of trying to calm down the mother of this child as she held her in her arms. That stuck with me. It's been with me all this time.
Yeah.
And I went right out, and the first thing I did is I took a CPR first aid course because I was like, I didn't feel like I could even handle myself in a situation where CPR was needed, or even to properly diagnose if CPR was needed. So I went right out, took my first course, and that got me started on this path. I certainly don't have the level of experience that you have, Brian, but I'm incredibly passionate about this topic. And one thing I wish I knew then, I learned this probably for the first time about 10 years ago, was what we're here to talk about today. And it's this one word that I think can really have a positive effect on people involved in these kind of situations, and might even save somebody's life. And that one word is actually it's actually a bit of a misnomer of the podcast episode today, the title, because it's really an acronym, but it is made up from a word. I mean, it forms a word, and that word is M.A.R.C.H. M-A-R-C-H. So, Brian, we brought you back on today to share with us your thoughts and to instruct us on the ways of this M.A.R.C.H algorithm, what it means, how we can use it to, again, know what to do, how to do it, prioritize what things, and keep us focused on the right things in a highly stressful trauma event.
Yeah, I think that the situation that you described, coming up on that accident when you're 18, I don't think that I've ever run into a police officer or a paramedic or a firefighter who hadn't said that the reason why they got into the job is because they felt helpless at some point in their life, and they didn't like feeling like that. And feeling like that, feeling helpless, drove them to go and find the training and figure out how to actually take care of somebody in a bad situation. And professionals like firefighters and EMTs and paramedics, they're not different from you and me. They've just been trained on what to do. They know what to do, and they have experience doing it. And it's harder to get that experience unless you're in a job like that, but you can still get the training and still get the practice and understand what to do. And it's not difficult. Like trauma medicine, they let people like me do it. So, it's not hard to learn this stuff. This is a very easy topic. The hard part about it is seeing the blood and knowing that there's a life on the line. That's usually what makes people kind of freeze up a little bit. Like, if I do the wrong thing, then they'll die. Well, if you don't do anything, then they could die. Or you could do everything right and they still die. Or you could do nothing and they live. You don't really have a whole lot of control over that beyond doing your best in the situation. And it's up to you to decide what your level of best is based on the training and the knowledge that you decide to get. And the course goes over a lot of this M.A.R.C.H stuff too. So if you want to go and check that out, it gets a little more in depth, and you can use that as a good resource. But M.A.R.C.H is generally used in the military as a part of the TCCC guidelines, the Tactical Combat Casualty Care. There's been a few letters added on at various stages. At one point, it was like P-M.A.R.C.P, and then it was M.A.R.C.P, and then I don't even know what it is now. But for the most part, I like to use just the regular M.A.R.C.H when I'm talking with civilians, because it covers the best variety of things that we need to be considering. And first and foremost, M.A.R.C.H. The first M stands for massive hemorrhage or massive bleeding, because that's the thing that's going to kill you the quickest. And it's the most easily treatable if you've got the right gear on you. You can do a lot of good for somebody if they're bleeding out. If you don't have any gear, The best thing that you can do to control bleeding is direct pressure. I think the best way to do that is with the palm of your hand. Just put the palm of your hand into the wound, directly into the wound. Don't mind the blood. If you've got gloves, obviously put those on. But if you don't, just direct pressure right into the wound and hold it there until the bleeding stops, and keep holding it until a police officer or a paramedic or EMT can get on scene with a cat tourniquet to assist you, because that's ultimately what's going to keep them alive for that major bleeding.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that we can do a lot with direct pressure on a wound, but the challenge is that it's hard to maintain pressure for a long time, because you may tire out, or there may be other things you need to address. You might even have multiple wounds that are both bleeding pretty badly,
or multiple casualties.
Exactly, and so that's where the value of a quality tourniquet really is seen, because you can apply consistent, constant, effective pressure on a limb that has bad arterial bleeding in particular, and get onto other things. So yeah, but you're right. The very first thing we want to do now. Actually, I want to back up a little bit, because you talked about how in your career, in your background, in your experience, the M.A.R.C.H algorithm has had some variations for you, such as M.A.R.C.H. And that first P, I think we should just mention this really quick, Brian, because I think this should it goes without saying, but it shouldn't go without saying. You know what I mean? Common sense would dictate, I think, but again, it's important that we acknowledge it, that when we're responding to a situation, we first need to make sure that we are not putting ourselves or anyone else in danger with our actions of responding to whatever thing is happening, right? So, for instance, if this is a car accident and you're on a busy highway, by you stopping, getting out of your car, running into the road, and you get hit by a semi truck as you're trying to run over to the median or something to assist this person, that does nobody any good. In fact, it hampers the rescue effort, because now first responders have multiple casualties to deal with instead of maybe just the one or whatever, the initial one. Of course, then you're injured or you're hurt or you're killed. So that's no good. That's not why anybody does what they do. So that's the P that precedes the M.A.R.C.H algorithm in some circles. And so, again, that should always be our consideration when something is going on. We're responding to an accident, an injury, any kind of event. Maybe it's an electrical shock, right? Somebody has just been shocked, electrocuted. We have to be super careful about approaching and not getting ourselves shocked as we're trying to render aid or assistance. So, our first thought in that kind of situation is, well, what is the source of electricity, and can it be shut off, right? And so, anyway, but I agree with you that particularly in a civilian context, keeping things simple is best. Even remembering 5 things is a lot for most people. 3 is more ideal, but unfortunately, with this kind of stuff, with this emergency trauma medicine, 3 things probably doesn't quite cover everything. So, I think there's the classic ABC acronyms used in the past, but M.A.R.C.H is definitely an improvement over ABC. So, massive hemorrhage. Let's continue on from there. Very first thing, like you said, getting direct pressure on the bleeding. And that allows us and hopefully buys us some time too. If we can actually get our palm, our hand, or even a thumb, putting pressure onto the source of the bleeding, then keeping the other hand free to go to a kit and start getting that kit open, getting that cat tourniquet out, getting it prepared, getting it ready to go on the leg, the arm, whatever it is.
Yep. And on children, it's even easier to get that artery to occlude with direct pressure. So if you have kids or grandkids who get a really bad wound where you're worried about life-threatening bleeding, you can usually stop that bleeding with just some direct pressure. So that's something to take into consideration as well. Yeah. And when it comes to, patient and provider safety, like you were talking about, that's one of the things that's kind of the hardest things for a lot of people to understand, because they see it as whether or not you're a coward or not. In the military, if you run into the line of fire to drag somebody back, that's very brave. Yes, but it's also very stupid, because if you get shot trying to go and save somebody else, now there's two people down. And especially if you're someone like me, who's the medic, now your team is without a medic, just because you are so brave to go out there and risk yourself. So you have to think about the larger picture. You got to accomplish the mission. The goal is not to be a hero. The goal is to do the most good possible. And sometimes the most good that you can do is do nothing, or find a way to make the scene safe so that you can actually accomplish something without being injured yourself. So we got P, patient and provider safety. We've got M.A.R.C.H, massive hemorrhage. That bleeding control, that's your most important thing. You need to double check and make sure that you're controlling that as much as possible. A patient can bleed out from a femoral artery within 2 minutes and 30 seconds to 3 minutes. I have a YouTube video coming out soon where we're talking a little bit about pressure dressing, and I show where they do they cut the femoral artery on a pig, and you can see how quickly that'll bleed out. And that's a pretty interesting thing. Yeah. Because one of the main things that I get with people who express fear about a trauma situation is knowing how much blood is enough to warrant the use of a tourniquet. When should I apply that tourniquet? How do I know I should be applying that tourniquet? And I always tell them, if you're worried, apply the tourniquet. If you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's a lot of blood, just go ahead and apply that tourniquet. There's a lot of people out there who think that if you apply a tourniquet, immediately they're just going to have that arm or that leg amputated. There's no getting around it, but that's not true. I actually have another video out on my YouTube channel discussing some of these tourniquet myths, and I talk about that one pretty closely. But the rule of thumb, based on a lot of studies, is 2 hours. You can leave a tourniquet in place for 2 hours before you start having enough tissue damage where they're going to need to get a limb amputated. Once you start getting past 6 hours, there's usually no going back, and the patient will definitely have to have a limb amputated. But as long as that tourniquet is off the patient within 2 hours, they're going to be just fine. So you got a lot of time. Average EMS response time in America is around 15 minutes, though. So if you can bleed out from a femoral artery within 2.5 to 3 minutes, you can see why a tourniquet is so important to, keeping someone alive. Eventually EMS will be there, but they're not going to be there fast enough to save you.
Yeah. You bring up a good point, Brian, especially talking about how a femoral artery injury can result to a person bleeding out. By bleeding out, you mean lose enough blood that they're going to die. Right. But here's something else to think about. Particularly, this is relevant in a situation where the injury is to you yourself. While you may have 2.5, 3 minutes to get that bleeding stopped or slowed down before you're in serious trouble, you might only have a few seconds before you may actually lose consciousness or get lethargic or incoherent or confused about the situation. I'm actually reminded, Brian, of a video I watched some time ago. I like you, probably I watch a lot of these officer-involved shootings, surveillance videos, these various attacks and things, because I'm always studying the I don't know if I dare say it, the art of violence, right? But the science and these things that happen to people in real life. I'm reminded actually of a stabbing where a man tries to defend, I think, another person from another man with a knife. And that man, the Good Samaritan, actually gets stabbed, I think, just one time in his thigh. And it severs his femoral artery. And within about 15 seconds, he collapses to the ground. Mm-hmm. Because, whoa, getting dizzy, down he goes. And probably within about 30 seconds, he slumps over. He's passed out at that point. So that's how fast it can happen if you get a severe enough arterial wound like that. We really need to be ready to act when it's ourselves that we're dealing with.
And it's also important to realize that you can't save everybody. As a medic, that's one of the things that I learned fairly early on, that there's just nothing that you can do. Even if you're the best medic in the world and you've been through this, if that guy that you were talking about, he got shot on the operating table, there's still a pretty good chance he would not have made that. There's just some things that you can't do. But what we want to focus on is preventable trauma, like preventable death, and knowing that, like, hey, I did everything that I could and that it just wasn't enough. You have to understand that and be able to accept that, because you can struggle with a lot of this stuff afterwards, second guessing yourself and playing mind games like I should have done this or I should have done that. And you can do that until it just drives you literally crazy. And you just got to realize sometimes there's nothing that you can do. So we get that bleeding controlled. Tourniquets are fantastic if it's on the arm or the leg, but if that wound is anywhere else on the body, tourniquets aren't going to work for you. So you want to be able to understand how other wounds affect the human body and what else you can use to treat that. And the hemostatic gauze, especially that quick clot, helps a lot for the junctional wounds in the armpits, the groin, and up here in the neck. And so learning how to use that, again, very simple, very easy. Anybody can do it. It just takes a little time learning it, and you can pick that up.
And there are such things as junctional tourniquets that exist, but those are pretty specialized equipment and also rather expensive. I mean, and somewhat large and bulky to carry around. So it's not typically something that your average person or civilian is going to have with them.
Right.
So if we were to summarize, though, real quick, for the M of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm or acronym, massive hemorrhage, our two primary tools for dealing with that is direct pressure and tourniquet. Is that right?
That's right. And then you could throw that third one in there, pressure dressing and hemostatic gauze.
Yeah. Again, if you have one of those junctional wounds and you don't have a junctional tourniquet that you can use, getting some hemostatic agent in there, and really, again, that's where direct pressure is going to be your friend.
Yes, absolutely. You can do a lot of good with just direct pressure. If you've got nothing else, just hold direct pressure until the ambulance gets to you, and you stand a pretty good shot.
Yeah, awesome. What's the A of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm?
A stands for Airway. This is one of those things you're not going to be able to do too much for as a first responder. You're just not going to have the equipment. You're not going to have, an endotracheal tube, to put down the throat or any other types of airways. Those are very specialized procedures that paramedics and, surgeons do. So you won't have access to that kind of stuff. So the best thing that you can do is if the patient is coherent, they're awake and talking to you, let them sit in a position that's most comfortable. Often, if they're struggling to breathe, then they're going to stand up or lean over into the tripod position with their hands or their arms on their knees, and try to let them do that if the situation permits. If there's something crazy going on where it's dangerous for them to sit up, obviously don't let them. But for the most part, we want to try to let them sit in a position that gets air in and out of their body as efficiently as possible, and also helps to keep their airway clear. If you have a trauma patient, a lot of times you also have vomiting. And if they are unconscious, they might not be awake enough to spit that vomit out of their mouth. So you want to try to roll them into a recovery position, if at all possible, so that if they do throw up, that it's not getting sucked back into their lungs and they basically drown. So that's pretty much the only thing that you can really do for airway, is to manage it that way. If they have an obstruction, say they got shot in the face or something, took a bat to the face and now they've got teeth in their throat, there's not a lot you could do for that as well, unless you can actually see the object in there. You don't do a blind finger sweep. You stick your finger in there and you don't see it and try to hook it and pull it out. You don't do that. You try to, if you can see it, then you can try to reach in and grab it. I don't recommend that. Trauma patients, they're not with it mentally, and you could lose a finger if they decide to chomp down on you. So that's also a risky thing. So trying to keep that airway open as best you can. Is going to be a little hard. Generally, the best thing that you can do is try to roll them over into the recovery position as best you can.
Yeah, and the recovery position, I think that's something that is sometimes overlooked. For instance, I just watched a video the other day. It was actually a Black Lives Matter kind of protest thing, and some of these protests, they have their own medics that are running around, but it's rather dubious the extent of the training of some of these so-called medics, because I've seen pretty interesting stuff. But there was something I saw the other day where they were trying to put somebody in the recovery position, but they really kind of missed some critical steps. Typically you want to have, so if you roll somebody to the left side, you want to get their left arm tucked under their head and neck to support the head and neck. And you're going to place the right leg and knee over the left leg, which is straight or generally maintained straight. And that kind of helps that person helps keep them balanced there on their side. And they just kind of rolled this dude on his side. And, when you just roll somebody on their side, like, what happens? They want to either tip over to their front or tip over to their back. So they're kind of trying to hold him in place. And I'm thinking, all you got to do is a couple real simple things.
Tripod.
Yeah, exactly. So don't overlook something as simple or as simple seeming as the recovery position.
Yeah. The recovery position, you roll them onto their side, so that way they're not laying on their back and they just throw up and it just drains back down. So that way it just goes off to the side. So recovery position.
Yeah. And what about MPAs, Brian? Tell us about MPAs.
MPAs are another great choice. They're only used for people who are unconscious. You can put them into a live patient, but they don't like it very much. And what I'm talking about, an MPA, is just a long, soft rubber trumpet, basically, and it runs into the nostril and down into the throat. And what that does is it helps keep a patent airway from your nose to your lungs. Sometimes what you'll have is, if they have facial trauma, neck trauma, anything like that, is swelling, and it'll shut off that airway, or it'll you risk having blood and other stuff running into the airway. So to try to keep that open, you can use a nasopharyngeal airway, NPA, and run that into their nose. You want to use a little bit of lube. A lot of times the NPAs will come with a little packet of lube, and you can lube it up on the end. As a medic, we were taught, use whatever you have available. If you don't have the lube, get some blood on it, stuff it down there that way, or whatever you've got available. So the NPAs are a great option to have for unconscious patients. You don't want to try to put it into a conscious patient. They don't really like it very much because it sits there in the back of the throat and it's pretty uncomfortable. If they're unconscious, they don't notice. But we used to do a little bit of training. When I was with the Marines, we would just get a lance corporal or something like that. Like, hey, get over here, lay down. And then, we just run it into his nose so we could show everybody how to do it. And it's fine. They don't like it, but it'll be okay.
Is this something well, first of all, tell me, how limited, can you describe to us, how frequent, I guess, or limited is an MPA truly needed, first of all? And then is this something you generally recommend for civilians to really be concerned with?
Well, it's kind of
like rather untrained civilians, not,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the hardest part is trying to teach people how to do this, or at least getting the information out on how to do it. A lot of people will carry this kind of stuff in their kit and never really understand what they're doing or why they're doing it. So that's the most difficult part. I think that if you understand how to use it and you've been shown how to do it and you fully understand what to do with it, absolutely use it. It's just a soft piece of rubber. You're not going to hurt the casualty anymore necessarily. So if they don't really need that and you shove that in there, they just pull it out. No big deal, right? If the casualty is awake, they probably won't let you do it anyway. So if you've got it, definitely learn how to use it and when to use it, and it'll be a good piece of kit for you.
All right. Let's so if we were to summarize the tools at our disposal for Airway, what would that be?
That would just be the NPA, understanding the recovery position, and letting them sit up in the tripod position if they are if they are alert and oriented.
Conscious. Yeah. Cool. Great. Let's move on to R.
R is for respirations, and this is the part of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm where you're going to check for penetrating chest trauma. So a lot of your community obviously is very gun oriented. So this could happen on a range. Someone's being negligent and they're not paying attention, or, you get in a gunfight and you take a couple rounds to the chest. That's what the chest seals are for, is for treating that. And the reason why you're treating it this far down in the line is because the main concern with the penetrating chest trauma is attention pneumothorax. And that can take around 20 minutes or so to develop. If anyone has seen that movie Three Kings with Ice Cube, George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, that's got a pretty good description or visual image of what's happening when a tension pneumothorax occurs. The only thing that they got wrong in that is that they showed the tension pneumothorax being almost instantaneous. Mark Wahlberg gets shot in the chest. He goes down, and immediately you start seeing what's happening inside his body as the tension pneumothorax starts to develop. And that can actually take around 20 minutes or so. So you've got a little bit of time to treat that. So that's not your main priority. Main priority is any major bleeding. You need to go and check the casualty for that first. If you don't find that, manage their airway, then move on to the chest seals. And you need to have at least 2 chest seals in your medical kit. You have to have one for the entrance and the exit if there is one. There isn't always an exit, but you need to be prepared for that, because if you're just putting a chest seal on the front, you totally forget about the back, then you've got a hole that you haven't taken care of. That tension pneumothorax develops and your casualty can expire. So, and again, when paramedics are on scene within 15 minutes, your casualty might be starting to get pretty uncomfortable from that tension pneumothorax, and they'll start having difficulty breathing, and they'll be complaining about chest pain, of course. And you might also see jugular vein distension, JVD, and the jugular vein will actually stand out from the neck. And you also see tracheal deviation, where the trachea will pivot to the opposite side of where the bullet hole was. So if I've got a hole here, it'll pivot to this side. And the reason for that is because air is building up in that chest cavity and it's not being able to escape. Every time you breathe in, it sucks a little air into your chest, but it doesn't let any out. You breathe in again, a little more air, and that keeps going until it builds up, and eventually it puts pressure on your heart and keeps your heart from beating. The pressure becomes so great, jugular vein distension, tracheal deviation, and you'll start seeing a lot of problems with that. And to prevent that from happening, you need to put on the chest seal. Now, that's not going to fix them. They still need to get to the hospital. They need to see a surgeon so the surgeon can put in a chest tube, get that lung to reinflate, and patch up all of the holes. But that will stabilize them and keep them alive until they can get there and get that done.
Yeah. Yep. I think I mentioned before that I've sustained a pneumothorax.
Yeah.
Lung from it was my rib, actually 7 ribs that broke that ended up puncturing my lung. A little bit different, but kind of results in the same thing, where the air is able to get outside of the lung and in the chest cavity, and that continues to build. It needs to be dealt with quickly.
That's pretty uncomfortable, right?
It was, that was not fun, dude. And it definitely got worse, the longer, as time went on, getting paramedics on the scene and transporting me to the hospital. That was the longest ride I have ever had. It felt like it lasted forever, because
you probably notice if there's bumps in the road too, I bet.
Oh yeah. I mean, when you're struggling for every breath that you take, boy, you start getting real switched on to, everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Does not feel good. So, chest seals, big one there. Again, in the context of shooting, concealed carry, that kind of thing. But we can have tension pneumothorax issues, penetrating chest injuries, when even with a vehicle accident where part of the frame of the car gets twisted and broken and shoves its way into somebody's chest or that kind of thing, right? Now we want to be really careful with removing objects from people's bodies. In fact, we shouldn't do that. But if we have a penetrating chest injury or wound, we want to close up that infiltration into the chest with a chest seal as soon as we can.
Yep. Definitely don't pull it out if there's an impaled object, because that impaled object could be sealing off an artery, or in the fact of the chest, it could be sealing off the chest so that air isn't entering in. So it's effectively becoming its own chest seal. And if you pull that out, you're creating a lot more damage.
Yep, exactly. We're actually making it worse for them. So now, if you were faced with a situation where you had a situation like that, an object impaling somebody's chest, and it was the difference between getting them removed from a vehicle that's about to explode or taking the risk of removing that object, well, I think we probably want to get them out of that. And this is what's great about the M.A.R.C.H algorithm, Brian, is it's intended to be followed in the order of the algorithm. It's not that we have to hit on everything, because not every part of this algorithm is going to be an issue with every patient. But we really should attack it from do we have massive hemorrhage first? Because they might have this other big issue, but if they bleed out in 2 minutes, that's the more immediate concern.
Yeah.
If we have somebody with some kind of injury and moving them may make it worse, but at the same time, this vehicle could explode and just kill them, instantly, or catch on fire or whatever. That's the immediate concern. So we always got to try to be thinking in terms of these priorities and not getting roadblocked because we think that this thing or that thing is, well, we can't do that because of this. And we got to go in this order or whatever. So we got to always be it's easy to get sucked in these traumatic events into. It's kind of like, how people talk about getting tunnel visioned in a gunfight. Well, really any stressful event can kind of create an effect of tunnel vision. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, I think breaking yourself out of that tunnel vision is something I always tried to do whenever I was working on a patient in a tense situation, because you'll get focused in on one thing and then that'll be the only thing that you see. So what I would try to do is I would pick my head up and look around me really carefully and identify some things. I would look over my casualty as I was working and making sure that I'm addressing everything that I needed to. And that's why the M.A.R.C.H algorithm helps, is because it takes all of the guesswork out of it. All you got to do is remember M.A.R.C.H, and that M stands for massive bleeding. Then you start running up on that casualty in the car or wherever it is, and you think to yourself, what do I do? Then you can think back to this podcast episode and think, M.A.R.C.H, M, massive bleeding. That's where you start. And that hardest step is that first one. If you can figure out what to do first, then the thing that comes after that is a little bit easier. You're like, okay, I got M out of the way. What's the next one? A, airway. Okay, that's not really a concern right here. They're awake, they're breathing, they don't have any trauma to their chest. I can skip that one. Mm-hmm. And then you start moving down the list until you come to the next problem. And then, you take save the day.
I'm actually reminded of a video that we just saw recently of it was a stabbing victim, mm-hmm. and police officers respond to the scene, and you got a man unconscious on the ground with apparent stab wounds. Family members or neighbors or somebody had attempted to wrap or tie clothing material around the individual's arm, where it appeared that this bad bleeding, this hemorrhage was occurring from. Officers arrive, and he did the right thing. He starts trying to deal with the hemorrhage, gets a tourniquet placed on the arm. Doesn't seem like there's any airway issue, because you can actually see the man breathing. He's very shallow breathing, but he was breathing. And then he notices it appears he has a penetrating chest wound. And so he applies a chest seal as his next step. And once he got that addressed, and another officer arrived on scene, then they started going back to the apparent hemorrhage wound, the bleeding on the arm, and trying to figure out whether the tourniquet that was applied was effective, where exactly was the bleeding coming from, that sort of thing. And I think this kind of starts leading us into our next portion of the algorithm, Brian. So far we've covered massive hemorrhage, M, A for airway, R for respiration. And to summarize your tool or tools for that R, things like your chest seal. And then, so now we get to the C in the M.A.R.C.H algorithm. What's that?
C stands for circulation. And I like to think about this stage as like the recheck. This is where I'm going to check back over to make sure I didn't miss any major bleeding. And that's easy to do, especially if you're in a care under fire phase. Say there's an active shooter situation and one of your buddies goes down. You could run over there and throw on a tourniquet. You see blood on his right leg. You throw on a tourniquet really close and heavy. You think you controlled it. You drag him off and totally miss the wound in his left arm. So the circulation phase of this allows you to go back over your casualty and do a more thorough check and make sure that you haven't missed any major bleeding. And to do this well, you need to expose the wound. Make sure that if you've got trauma shears, you're stripping off all of those clothes so that you can get a real close look at where that wound is coming from and making sure that it's stopped with the tourniquet. If it hasn't been, then you need to make sure that tourniquet is doing what it's supposed to do. If it looks like it is, apply another tourniquet. If that bleeding still hasn't stopped, you're going to apply that even closer to the body so you're going to go closer to the body away from the wound. So if the tourniquet is above the knee, you're going to go high into the groin and apply the tourniquet there. So you always want to go closer to the body when you're putting on a new tourniquet. So circulation, this is where you're going to do that recheck and make sure that you haven't missed anything important. Make sure you're getting a view of that injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talk in the training video about doing a kind of head to toe sweep. I imagine it's really important to do this with clean hands, or as clean as you can, because again, you're trying to identify and make sure there's not anything else. So you're sweeping the body, sweeping around the head and the neck, coming down each arm, down the chest, the back, the legs, the groin, etc., and checking hands as you're performing that sweep and looking to see if there's any additional blood to identify those other wounds.
Yeah, I was taught to do a bear claw method, and that's more designed for, when it's really dark and you can't see and you don't know where the wounds are. And the idea is that one of your fingers will slip into the hole when you find one, and then you'll be able to, figure out where that is. But ideally, all you're trying to do is just a close examination. And one of the things you're going to be looking for are a lot of small wounds. You might need to treat those as well, because one big wound is really bad, but so is a lot of small wounds. You can bleed out from that as well. In the military, this is a lot more common because you might get splattered with shrapnel and you've got a lot of holes everywhere. Not so much in the civilian world, but it is something you should probably pay attention to. If there's a lot of small wounds, make sure that you're paying attention to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, great stuff. And then another thing too with circulation, I mean, isn't this the appropriate time to check for pulse and that sort of thing? And I kind of think of it as a check to make, to sort of check that the things I've done so far are actually working.
Yeah, I think ideally you and I would probably do that because, we've been trained on how to do it. And it does get a little more complicated than just, knowing where your pulse is and how to take it. You also need to know what the average is for a pulse rate is. And that can change depending on your victim. If you have a child, they might have a much higher heart rate than if you've got, your 25-year-old triathlete, they're going to have a much different heart rate. And so will elderly. So it does take a little more effort to understand that. But again, it's very easy to do. You got to stay on top of it. You got to always be practicing this stuff, always be remembering and trying it out, or else you'll forget it. But once you understand what you're doing when you're taking the vital signs, yes, this is absolutely a good time to start trying that out, get a good pulse, make sure that you've got a pulse on every limb that should have one. If you've got a tourniquet and you feel a pulse,
Right.
your tourniquet's not doing very well. So you want to go back and recheck that as well. So yes, this is a great place for that circulation phase.
Well, and I guess kind of where I'm going with it too, from a civilian context, we do have a lot of, you know, non-professional civilians that may be dealing with a situation like this, and you may not be familiar with all the ins and outs of checking a pulse and reading it for what it is. But you know, the fact that you can find a pulse is a good thing. Oh, hey, their heart's beating. Blood is moving. I mean, this is the circulation phase of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm. And so it would be at this point, you know, particularly if I was CPR, AED trained, right? Because again, keeping things in priority order, and this all happens very quickly. Massive hemorrhage. Oh, man, tourniquet on that thing, right? Check airway. Okay, they are breathing. I'm getting a little bit of, you know, air movement through from their chest or their nose or whatever, their mouth. Respiration, chest seal, bam, it's on, right? And then we're on to circulation. And if at this point we, you know how to check a pulse, because if they don't have a pulse, and if you check their wrist and you're not finding anything, you check their neck, you know, that's a lot closer to the heart, a little bit easier to find. You're not getting anything there. It's time for compressions.
Yeah. And I think you can check. One of the best ways to start learning how to check your pulse is just start on yourself. You know, find all of your own pulses first, and then start getting your family members to hold still for you for a little while so that you can find theirs. You know, I like to try to find the pulse on my wife and my kids, you know, because I've got 3 savage little boys running around. They get into trouble all the time. I want to make sure that I know how to take care of them when time comes as well. And it also gets them used to the whole process as well. They learn a little bit at the same time.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Great. All right, so if we were summarizing our tools available to, you know, and at our disposal for circulation, part of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm would be checking for additional bleeding, checking that tourniquets and things that have already been applied are working, that they're still in place, that nothing has slipped or moved, and then perhaps also checking for pulse and checking if their heart is actually working, and if not, considering using chest compressions, or if an AED is available. That's sure a thing, isn't it, Brian? You know, and we're seeing so many more of them in public spaces, especially. There more and more of them are available to where, you know, anytime you have a stopped heart, we want to get on the compressions right away, because that should be done while we're waiting for an AED to arrive. But if you're the ones taking charge of the scene, you need to be directing people to go find an AED if it's available, because that is an absolute lifesaver.
Didn't we have a story come across a little while ago where someone was at a gun range and somebody had an AED in their trunk?
Yeah, I think that was that a PCC match or a 3-gun match? That was in Missouri, by the way. Huh. And yes, there was an AED on site that a fellow competitor had with them, and a gentleman, a fellow competitor, had collapsed from a heart attack, and they were able to grab that AED. I mean, keep in mind, they're at a gun range that a lot of gun ranges aren't necessarily close to immediate medical care. More and more gun ranges, by the way, are keeping AEDs on hand, but sometimes they may still be a ways away. But this fellow competitor had one in their vehicle, and within seconds was able to retrieve that and get this AED going on this gentleman. It saved his life.
That's amazing.
It truly is.
I think, yeah, it's amazing that she even had that in her car. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's why you need the medical kits. The Wind River is why we got that set up, is primarily for organizations like gun ranges or people that are going to these matches. You never know, especially, you know, if you've got someone that, you know, has a negligent discharge, it goes through 2 or 3 people, then, you know, you want to have the stuff available to be able to take care of that.
Yep. There you go. And that was exactly our thought process and your thought process when this Wind River kit was put together. The whole reason that there's 2 cat tourniquets in there, you know, and there's also still a SWAT T available, because it's a very real possibility in the case of a high-powered rifle, you know, a 30-06, a 308, a 7mm, you know, that sort of thing, being discharged, it could very easily pass through multiple people, wounding, you know, a lot of people. So that's why this kit it goes a little bit above and beyond to just helping out one person.
Yeah.
All right. That brings us to the H of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm.
Yes. And H stands for head injury. And additionally, it's probably a little more importantly, it states for hypothermia. And the reason why head injury is so far down on the list is because there's not a lot you can really do for a head injury. When you're out in the field, there's just not much that you can do. You want to try to keep an eye on their neck, make sure that you're trying to stabilize the spine as much as possible, trying to keep it in place if you can. There are some techniques for doing that the best possible way. And then at the same time of stabilizing the neck, you're also going to try to do it in a way that allows them to move air into and out of their body more efficiently. So there is a little bit of training that goes into that so that you can do it right. So head injuries, there's not a lot that you can do for it. Make sure that you're calling 911 at the earliest possibility so that you can get medics on scene. But beyond that, just try to keep them stabilized. Try to make sure that they're not moving their neck and their head around as much as possible. But the last H, I'm sorry, what's that?
I was just saying, yeah, I agree. Keep going, brother.
Right.
Preach the gospel.
The last one is hypothermia. Trauma patients, especially ones that have gotten lost a lot of blood, are at a huge risk for hypothermia. Your blood does a lot to regulate your body temperature. And if you've lost a lot of blood, you could start to see a decrease in the core body temperature. So if you're going to be on scene for any length of time, you want to try to make sure that you're keeping your casualty nice and warm. And you can do that with a couple of various different ways, coats and blankets, or move them inside next to the heater, or whatever that you need to do. In the Wind River kits, we have the emergency blankets, the Mylar blankets that you can spread over them to help keep them warm. You want to make sure that you're doing that, because if you don't, they have a risk of dying from that. And it also decreases their ability to survive the injury. Even if they do get to the hospital, if their body temperature is too low, it might not be high enough for them to actually recover from it. And it also inhibits the clotting of the blood and increases bleeding. So keeping the patient warm is really important.
Yeah. And that's why the Wind River kit from Mountain Medical, it's the first kit that's really a little bit, it's more able to deal with the broader spectrum of the M.A.R.C.H algorithm of helping people get through these traumatic events. Having the inclusion of that space blanket, or that's what I call a space blanket, right? The rescue emergency blanket, whatever. So that's in there as well. So
yeah,
good thing to have. So Brian, we've gone through M, massive hemorrhage, A, airway or airway control, another phrase that's used for it. C, for circulation. R, respiration. And H, hypothermia and head trauma. How do we wrap this up?
Well, I would say that one of the biggest things that I've noticed, especially when I was early on in my career, is not knowing what to do next. I would go through the entire M.A.R.C.H algorithm, and then I'd think, all right, now what? You're still looking at the patient. The patient's still there. There's still blood everywhere, and the ambulance hasn't showed up. What do you do now? And the best thing that you can do, start at the top and go and work your way back down again. And I just keep going over the M.A.R.C.H algorithm over and over again until help arrives. I start at the top. I work at M.A.R.C.H, making sure all of my tourniquets are where they're supposed to be and they're doing what I want them to do. And then I just keep working my way down and hit each one of those wickets and make sure that I took care of everything that I needed to and I didn't forget anything. And I just keep doing that until help arrives.
Yeah. I mean, it's entirely possible you work your way through the algorithm and something's changed, in that time. Maybe they were breathing before, but then all of a sudden that breathing stops, right? That sort of thing. So, yeah, we want to stay on top of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Brian, it's been a great episode today to go over this, cover this with you. As Mark is commenting here on Facebook, this is super informative. I'm glad we could bring this content to you, Mark, and everyone else watching and listening wherever you may be. Again, Brian is super passionate about this. I'm super passionate about this. I think, here's the thing, super low commitment because it's not even going to cost you a dime. And even if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't have any training, I don't know where I'd get training, I don't have money to afford training, that sort of thing, you know what? Just get started and go to mountainmanmedical.com/trauma-medicine-training and take the emergency trauma response free online video training course. A couple hours of content there. Really, really good stuff. Join the Facebook group that those that go through that training are able to then become a part of, and go find a Stop the Bleed course, because again, those are much more widely available than probably people realize. I could just about guarantee you there's something reasonably close to you wherever you may be, where you can get a Stop the Bleed course. And if you can't find one, you can go to their website, and I'm pretty sure there's a way you can request, or you can, start asking for some resources about how to maybe bring one to you. So, so maybe there absolutely could be the opportunity to set one up in your local community, wherever you may be. So, get started and just take this free online training course. That'll get your appetite whetted, if you will, get you kind of started, and then take it from there. Again, today we're also recognizing the new Mountain Man Medical Wind River Trauma Kit. Again, this thing about as massive as my head is. Of course, everybody knows how big my ego is, so it's a really huge kit. So this is I'm really excited about this product. Since we launched this, last week, I've actually been really pleased with just how fast they've been selling. People seem to really be excited about these kits, and they're great kits. Good kudos to you, Brian, and putting them together.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of good responses from them. A lot of people are buying multiples, I'm assuming, for organizations, putting them in their church or, wherever they're at, making sure that everyone's got the gear that they need.
Or making sure they have one in every vehicle.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, mountainmanmedical.com is where you can find all this great content and these products, of course. We got more stuff planned and more stuff coming too. So stay tuned.
Yeah, check us out on Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel where we talk more about this kind of stuff. So if you want to head over there, just subscribe to that. And I've got a bunch of videos already up and more on the way.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for doing this episode with me today, Brian.
Absolutely. I had a blast.
We'll see you again soon, I am sure. So, folks, that is a wrap for this episode. We'll be back with more podcast content next week, so be watching for us. Good things coming, more content, and then actually some special interviews too that we're getting lined up that I'm really looking forward to as well. So with that, we're going to let you go. A reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.